The morning sun cast long shadows across the airport terminal as retired Sergeant Major William Thompson adjusted his worn uniform jacket one final time. At 73 years old, his shoulders still carried the proud bearing of a man who had served his country with distinction for over 3 decades. The Victoria Cross medal pinned to his chest caught the light as he walked slowly through the busy corridors of Heathrow Airport. His walking stick tapping rhythmically against the polished floor, William had been looking forward to this journey. For months, his grandson David was getting married in Edinburgh, and this would be the first time in years that the entire Thompson family would be together. The old soldier had saved every penny to afford the flight, choosing to fly rather than take the lengthy train journey that his aging body could know longer endure comfortably. As he approached the check-in counter for Royal Airways, William noticed the bustling activity around him, families with excited children, business travelers hurrying with their laptops, and couples heading off on romantic getaways, filled the terminal with energy. He smiled, remembering his own travels during his military service. Though those journeys had been far less pleasant and under very different circumstances, the young woman behind the counter looked up as William approached, her professional smile faltering slightly as she took in his appearance. His uniform, while meticulously maintained, showed the wear of many years. The fabric had faded in places, and though every button was polished and every crease was sharp, it was clearly from a bygone era. "Good morning," William said cheerfully, presenting his boarding pass and identification. "Beautiful day for flying, isn't it?" The clerk, whose name tag read Jessica, glanced at his documents and then at her computer screen. Her fingers clicked across the keyboard as she processed his information. William waited patiently, watching the planes through the large windows behind the desk, remembering the many aircraft he had seen during his service years. "I'm sorry, sir," Jessica said after a few moments, her tone becoming noticeably cooler. "There seems to be an issue with your booking. You've been assigned to economy class, but your attire suggests you might be expecting some kind of special treatment?" William blinked in surprise. "Special treatment?" "No, miss. I just want to get to my grandson's wedding. Economy class is perfectly fine with me." Jessica's supervisor, a middle-aged man named Mr. Richards, had been watching the interaction from nearby. He approached the counter with an expression of barely concealed irritation. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though his question was directed more at William than at his employee. "No problem at all," William replied politely. "I'm just checking in for my flight to Edinburgh." Mr. Richards looked William up and down, taking in the old uniform and the medal on his chest. His expression suggested he was less than impressed. "Sir, I need to inform you that this airline maintains certain standards. If you're looking for attention or special privileges because of your costume, you'll be disappointed." The words hit William like a physical blow. Costume. He had worn this uniform with pride for over 30 years, had earned every ribbon and medal through service and sacrifice. The Victoria Cross on his chest represented the highest military honor awarded for extraordinary valor in the face of enemy fire. "This isn't a costume, Sir," William said quietly, his voice steady, despite the hurt he felt. "I served in the Royal Guards for 32 years. This medal was awarded by Her Majesty the Queen herself for actions during the Falklands conflict." Richard scoffed openly. "Right. And I suppose you single-handedly won the war?" "Look, grandfather, we get all sorts of people trying to play dress-up for free upgrades or special treatment. Your economy ticket gets you economy service, nothing more." Other passengers in line had begun to notice the commotion. Some craned their necks to see what was happening, while others shifted uncomfortably as they witnessed the elderly man being publicly humiliated. William felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment, but he maintained his composure as he had been trained to do decades earlier. "I understand," William said simply. "I just want to get to Edinburgh for my grandson's wedding, that's all." Jessica looked between her supervisor and the old man, something in her expression suggesting she wasn't entirely comfortable with the situation. But she remained silent as Mr. Richards continued his dismissive treatment of the veteran. "Well then, keep your stories to yourself and proceed to your gate. And next time, maybe dress appropriately for air travel instead of playing make-believe," Mr. Richards said with a sneer that made several nearby passengers gasp audibly. William nodded quietly. gathered his documents, and began the long walk toward his gate. Behind him, he could hear whispered conversations among the other passengers, some expressing outrage at what they had witnessed. But William had learned long ago that dignity meant walking away from confrontation when possible, especially when the battle wasn't worth fighting. As he made his way through the terminal, the weight of the encounter settled heavily on his shoulders. He had faced enemy fire, had saved the lives of his fellow soldiers under impossible circumstances, had been decorated by royalty for his bravery. Yet here in this airport he felt smaller than he had in decades. The old soldier found an empty seat near his gate and settled in to wait for boarding, unaware that this humiliating encounter would soon reach the ears of someone who would not stand for such disrespect toward one of Britain's most decorated heroes. Sarah Mitchell had been working as a flight attendant for Royal Airways for 8 years, but she had never witnessed anything quite like what she had just seen at the check-in counter. From her position near the boarding gate, she had watched the entire exchange between the elderly gentleman and Mr. Richards. The disrespectful treatment of the old soldier had left her feeling both angry and ashamed of her employer. As a daughter of a Royal Navy veteran herself, Sarah recognized the authentic details that others might miss. The way the man held himself, the precise placement of his ribbons, the genuine wear patterns on a uniform that had clearly seen real service. Most telling of all was the Victoria Cross on his chest, a medal she knew was not something anyone could simply purchase or fake. During her break, Sarah approached William as he sat quietly reading a newspaper near the gate. "Excuse me, sir," she said gently, settling into the seat beside him. "I couldn't help but notice what happened earlier at check-in. I want you to know that not everyone here shares that attitude." William looked up with tired but kind eyes. "That's very thoughtful of you, miss. Don't worry about an old soldier. I've dealt with worse than a rude airline employee. My father served in the Navy," Sarah continued. "He taught me to recognize and respect our veterans. That medal you're wearing, it's a Victoria Cross, isn't it?" A small smile crossed William's weathered face. "Your father raised you well." "Yes, it is. Though I sometimes wonder if wearing it does more harm than good these days." Sarah felt her anger flare again. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to make a phone call. I have contacts in the media, and what happened to you shouldn't be ignored." "I don't want any fuss," William protested gently. "I just want to get to my grandson's wedding without any more trouble." But Sarah was already pulling out her phone. "Sometimes the right kind of fuss is exactly what's needed," she said with determination. Within minutes, Sarah had connected with her friend Marcus, a reporter for the London Daily Herald. Marcus had built his career on human interest stories, particularly those involving veterans and social justice issues. As Sarah recounted the morning's events, she could practically hear Marcus's investigative instincts kicking into high gear. "Get me his full name and service details if you can," Marcus said urgently. "If this man is who I think he might be, this story is bigger than just airline rudeness." Sarah returned to William, who had been watching her phone conversation with growing concern. "Sir, I hope you don't mind, but could you tell me a bit about your service? The reporter I just spoke with thinks your story deserves to be heard." William sighed deeply. Sergeant Major William Thompson, Royal Guards, served from 1969 to 2001. The Victoria Cross was awarded in 1982 during the Falklands conflict. Sarah's eyes widened as she relayed this information to Marcus, who had put her on speaker while he rapidly typed into his computer. Within moments, Marcus had pulled up William's military records and began reading aloud. "Sarah, you need to hear. This, Sergeant Major William Thompson, single-handedly held off an enemy position for 4 hours after his unit was pinned down by superior forces. Despite being wounded twice, he continued to provide covering fire that allowed 17 of his fellow soldiers to reach safety. His actions are credited with preventing what could have been one of the worst casualties of the Falklands War." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she looked at the humble man sitting beside her. He was a genuine war hero, a man who had literally saved lives under fire, and he had been treated like a fraud seeking attention. "There's more," Marcus continued. "After the war, Thompson continued to serve with distinction. He was involved in peacekeeping operations, trained new recruits, and was specifically commended by multiple commanding officers for his leadership and dedication. This man is the real deal, Sarah." As Sarah ended the call, she noticed that other Passengers in the gate area had been listening to parts of the conversation. Word began to spread quietly through the waiting area that the elderly gentleman who had been humiliated earlier was actually a decorated war hero. A businessman in an expensive suit approached William hesitantly. "Excuse me, sir, but I overheard that young lady talking about your service. I want you to know that some of us appreciate what you've done for our country." Soon a small crowd had gathered around William, not seeking autographs or photos, but simply wanting to express their gratitude and respect. William seemed both touched and overwhelmed by the attention, repeatedly insisting that he had simply done his duty. Meanwhile, Marcus was already crafting his article, but he had also made another phone call, this one to a contact within the royal household. The story of a Victoria Cross recipient being publicly humiliated by an airline employee was exactly the kind of incident that would not sit well with the royal family, particularly given their strong support for veterans. William's flight was finally called for boarding. Sarah made sure he was among the first passengers to board. She had also quietly arranged with the senior flight attendant to ensure that William received the respectful treatment he deserved during the flight. But unbeknownst to everyone involved, the wheels had already been set in motion for a response that would reach the very highest levels of British society. Marcus's article was being fast-tracked for publication, and his contact in the royal household had already begun making discreet inquiries about the incident. By the time William's plane took off for Edinburgh, the story of his mistreatment had begun to spread through social media and news networks. What had started as a simple case of airline rudeness was about to become a national conversation about how society treats its veterans and heroes. Within hours of Marcus's article going live on the London Daily Herald website, the story had exploded across social media platforms. The headline "War Hero Humiliated by Airline Staff" was being shared thousands of times, accompanied by photos of William in his younger days, alongside his current image at the airport. Veterans organizations, military support groups, and ordinary citizens expressed their outrage at the treatment he had received. The article detailed not just the airport incident, but also William's extraordinary military record. Grotus had managed to interview former comrades who spoke of Williams's courage, leadership, and unwavering dedication to his fellow soldiers. The contrast between his heroic service and his humiliation at Heathrow created a powerful narrative that resonated with readers across the country. At Buckingham Palace, Private Secretary Sir Jonathan Whitmore was among the first to bring the story to the attention of King Charles III. The King had always maintained a strong personal commitment to supporting veterans and active military personnel, was deeply troubled by what he read. "This is unacceptable," King Charles said firmly as he reviewed the article on his tablet during his afternoon briefing. Sergeant Major Thompson served with distinction for over 3 decades. Victoria Cross is not a trinket, it represents extraordinary valor and sacrifice. How he was treated is a disgrace. Sir Jonathan nodded in agreement. "Your Majesty, we've already received hundreds of messages from the public expressing similar sentiments. This story has clearly struck a nerve with the British people." King Charles set down his tablet and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. "What do we know about Sergeant Major Thompson's current situation? Where is he now?" "According to our information, he was traveling to Edinburgh for his grandson's wedding. The ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at St. Giles Cathedral." The king turned back to his aide with a look of determination. "Edinburgh, you said? How interesting. I believe I have some appointments that could be rescheduled." Meanwhile, at Royal Airways headquarters, CEO Margaret Hartwell was dealing with a public relations nightmare. Her phone had been ringing non-stop as journalists sought comment on the story. The airline's social media accounts were being flooded with angry messages from customers threatening to boycott the company. "Get me Richards on the phone immediately," she barked at her assistant, "and I want a full report on this incident within the hour." When Mr. Richards finally answered his phone, his voice was shaky. He had spent the afternoon watching his name trend on social media, alongside words like disgrace and shame. The security footage of his interaction with William had somehow made its way onto the internet. The public reaction was overwhelmingly negative. "Richards, what exactly happened with this war veteran?" Margaret demanded. "Ma'am, People all the time trying to claim special treatment. I thought he was just another attention seeker with a fake uniform, Richard stammered. A fake Victoria Cross? Do you have any idea how rare and sacred that medal is? There are fewer than 15 living recipients in the entire country. Margaret's voice rose with each word. I didn't know, ma'am. I just thought you didn't think at all. Your ignorance and rudeness have created a public relations disaster for this company. Consider yourself suspended pending a full investigation. As Richards ended the call, knowing his career was likely over, Margaret was already planning damage control. But she knew that in cases like this, actions spoke louder than corporate apologies. In Edinburgh, William had finally arrived at his hotel. Blissfully unaware of the media storm swirling around him, son Michael picked him up from the airport. And they spent a quiet evening with family, sharing stories and preparing for the next day's wedding celebration. Dad, you look tired, Michael observed as they sat in the hotel restaurant. Was the flight difficult? William hesitated, not wanting to dampen the mood before his grandson's big day. It's just a bit of turbulence with the airline staff. Nothing worth mentioning. But David, William's grandson and tomorrow's groom, had been checking his phone and noticed something unusual. Oh? Grandfather, I keep seeing news stories about someone with your name. Is this you? He turned his phone screen toward William, showing Marcus's article. William's eyes widened as he saw his own photo staring back at him from the screen. Oh my goodness, how did this happen? As the family huddled around the phone, reading the article and the thousands of supportive comments, William felt a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. He had never sought publicity for his service, but the overwhelming support from strangers was deeply moving. Grandfather David said with obvious emotion, I had no idea your service record was so distinguished. Hero, but reading about what you actually did, I just did my job, son, William replied quietly, just like thousands of other brave men and women. Michael put his hand on his father's shoulder. Dad, maybe it's time people knew exactly what kind of man you are. Maybe this attention, uncomfortable as it might be, will help others understand the sacrifices our veterans have made. As the evening wore on, the family fielded calls from reporters and well-wishers. The story had touched something deep in the British consciousness, tapping into feelings about respect, honor, and how society should treat those who have served. None of them could have imagined that by morning, the story would reach the very pinnacle of British society, and that William's quiet dignity in the face of humiliation would soon be recognized in the most extraordinary way possible. The morning of David's wedding dawned crisp and clear over Edinburgh. William woke early, as was his habit from decades of military service, and spent time carefully preparing his dress uniform for the ceremony. Today would be different from yesterday's travel attire. Today, he would wear his full ceremonial dress uniform, complete with all his medals and ribbons. In honor of his grandson's special day, as he carefully pinned each medal to his chest, William reflected on the events of the previous day. The media attention made him uncomfortable, but he was grateful for the overwhelming support from the public. Perhaps some good would come from the unfortunate incident at the airport. Meanwhile, across the city, an unmarked car was making its way through Edinburgh's historic streets. Inside, King Charles III reviewed his notes one final time with Sir Jonathan Whitmore. The king had made an extraordinary decision after reading about William's treatment and learning more about his service record. Your Majesty, are you certain about this approach? Sir Jonathan asked diplomatically. We could arrange a formal meeting at the palace later, with proper protocol and media coverage. King Charles shook his head firmly. Sometimes the most meaningful gestures are the unexpected ones. Sergeant Major Thompson has waited long enough for the recognition and respect he deserves. Today seems like the perfect day to provide both. At St. Giles Cathedral, the wedding preparations were in full swing. David stood nervously at the altar, adjusting his tie for the 10th time, while guests filled the ancient pews. William sat in the front row, his uniform immaculate, his Victoria Cross catching the light from the stained glass windows. The congregation included family members, friends, and several veterans from William's old regiment who had traveled to Edinburgh after Hearing about the airport incident, their presence added a dignified military element to the civilian celebration. Just as the processional music began and David's bride appeared at the back of the cathedral, there was a slight commotion near the main entrance. Several well-dressed individuals entered quietly, scanning the congregation with professional efficiency. Most guests were too focused on the bride to notice. But William's trained eye caught the subtle signs of security personnel. The ceremony proceeded beautifully. David and his bride Sarah exchanged vows with obvious love and commitment, while their families watched with joy and tears. William felt his heart swell with pride as he watched his grandson become a married man. For a moment, he forgot about airports and airlines and media attention. Lost in the simple happiness of family celebration, as the newlyweds processed down the aisle after the ceremony, guests began to file out of the cathedral for the reception. William was among the last to leave, taking time to speak with old military friends and accept congratulations from other guests who recognized him from the news coverage as he finally stepped outside into the Edinburgh sunshine. William noticed a small crowd gathering near the cathedral steps. Photographers and reporters had somehow learned of his presence at the wedding. They were hoping for interviews and photographs. Sergeant Major Thompson called out a reporter from the BBC. "How do you feel about the public response to your story?" William smiled politely but shook his head. "Today's about my grandson and his bride. That's all I want to focus on." Just then, the crowd's attention shifted dramatically. A sleek black car had pulled up to the cathedral, and as the door opened, a familiar figure emerged. Gasps and whispers rippled through the gathering as King Charles III, dressed in civilian clothes, but unmistakably regal in bearing, stepped onto the pavement. The king's security detail moved smoothly to create a respectful perimeter, while he walked directly toward William, who stood frozen in shock. The entire crowd fell silent as they witnessed this unexpected royal visit. "Sergeant Major Thompson," King Charles said warmly, extending his hand. "I hope I'm not intruding on your family's celebration." William, his military training taking over. Despite his amazement, snapped to attention and offered a perfect salute. "Your Majesty, this is I cannot believe... At ease, Sergeant Major," the king said gently, returning the salute before grasping William's hand in both of his own. "I read about your experience yesterday, and I felt compelled to come and personally apologize on behalf of anyone who failed to show you the respect you deserve." Tears welled up in William's eyes as the magnitude of this moment struck him. Was the King of England, the son of the Queen who had pinned the Victoria Cross to his chest all those years ago, taking time from his schedule to personally address the humiliation he had suffered. "Your Majesty, you didn't need to come all this way," William managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "On the contrary," King Charles replied firmly, "when one of our most decorated veterans is treated with disrespect, it reflects poorly on all of us. Your service during the Falklands conflict saved 17 lives. Your decades of dedication to duty and country deserve recognition, not humiliation." The king paused, looking directly into William's eyes. "But more than that, I understand today is your grandson's wedding day. I wonder if I might have the honor of meeting the happy couple and offering my congratulations." David and Sarah, who had been watching this exchange in stunned silence, were gently encouraged forward by family members. As they approached, both were visibly nervous but clearly honored by this unexpected royal presence at their wedding. The photographers captured every moment as King Charles congratulated the newlyweds, spoke warmly with family members, and engaged in genuine conversation with the assembled veterans. But the most powerful images were of the king and William standing together. Two men separated by birth and circumstance, but united by their shared commitment to duty and service. As King Charles continued to speak with the wedding party and assembled guests, his genuine warmth and interest in each person became evident. He spent several minutes talking with William's son Michael about his father's service and congratulated David and Sarah again on their marriage, asking about their plans for the future. "Your grandfather is a remarkable man," the king told David quietly. "The Victoria Cross is not awarded lightly. What he did in the Falklands, The courage he showed under impossible circumstances represents the very best of British military tradition. David nodded, clearly moved by the king's words. We've always known grandfather was special, Your Majesty. But yesterday's events and your presence here today have shown us just how special he really is. Meanwhile, the media presence outside the cathedral had grown exponentially. News crews from major networks had rushed to Edinburgh upon hearing that the king had made an unscheduled visit to support the veteran who had been mistreated. The images and video footage of the royal encounter were already being broadcast across the country and around the world. Inside the growing crowd, former soldiers from William's regiment stood with visible pride as they watched their old sergeant major receive the recognition he deserved. Colonel James Harrison, William's former commanding officer during the Falklands conflict, had driven through the night from Glasgow to be present for David's wedding. Sergeant Major Thompson was the finest soldier I ever served with, Colonel Harrison told a reporter from Sky News. What happened to him yesterday was a national disgrace. But seeing our king here today, showing the respect that William has always deserved, this restores my faith in our country. As the impromptu reception on the cathedral steps continued, King Charles made an announcement that surprised everyone present, including his own security detail. Sergeant Major Thompson, the king said, raising his voice slightly so all could hear. Yesterday you were treated poorly by individuals who failed to recognize your worth and service. Today I want to ensure that never happens again. The king reached into his jacket and withdrew an official document bearing the royal seal. By royal decree, you are hereby appointed as an honorary colonel of the Royal Guards Regiment, with all the privileges and recognition that appointment entails. Furthermore, you and your family are invited to be my personal guests at next month's Trooping the Color ceremony. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause as William stared at the document in disbelief. An honorary colonelcy was an extraordinarily rare honor, typically reserved for senior royals or the most distinguished military leaders. For a retired sergeant major to receive such recognition was virtually unprecedented. Your Majesty, I don't know what to say, William stammered, his usual composure finally breaking under the weight of the moment. Say nothing, King Charles replied with a smile. Your service has already spoken volumes. This recognition is long overdue. As photographs were taken and final congratulations offered, the king prepared to depart. But before leaving, he had one more surprise. I understand there was some trouble with your airline experience yesterday, King Charles said with a slight smile. I've taken the liberty of ensuring that your return journey will be more befitting of a Victoria Cross recipient and newly appointed honorary colonel. Sir Jonathan stepped forward with travel documents. Your Majesty has arranged for you and your family to return to London on the royal flight. Consider it a small gesture of appreciation for your decades of service. The crowd watched in amazement as this extraordinary day continued to unfold. From humiliation at an airport check-in counter to a personal visit from the king at his grandson's wedding, William's story had become a powerful reminder of the importance of recognizing and respecting those who have served their country. As the king's car pulled away from the cathedral, William stood surrounded by his family and friends, still clutching the royal appointment in his hands. The contrast with yesterday's experience could not have been more profound. David put his arm around his grandfather's shoulders. Grandfather, I think this might be the most memorable wedding in our family's history. William chuckled, his eyes still bright with unshed tears. Son, I came to Edinburgh for your wedding, and somehow I ended up meeting the king. Life certainly has a way of surprising us. The wedding reception that followed was unlike any the family had ever imagined. Guests who had witnessed the royal visit were still buzzing with excitement, and the story dominated conversation throughout the evening. But for William, the most meaningful moment came when his entire family gathered around him during the reception, Dad Michael said, raising his glass in a toast. Yesterday we were angry about how you were treated. Today we're overwhelmed with pride, not just because of the royal recognition, but because the whole country finally sees what we've always known. You're a true hero. As the evening continued and the celebration moved forward, William reflected on the remarkable turn of events. In less than 24 hours, he had experienced the worst and best of human nature. The humiliation at the airport had been painful, but it had also set in motion a chain of events that brought him recognition beyond his wildest dreams. More importantly, the incident had sparked a national conversation about how society treats its veterans. It's the overwhelming public support and the king's personal intervention sent a clear message that disrespecting those who had served their country would not be tolerated. 3 weeks after the extraordinary events in Edinburgh, the impact of William's story continued to resonate throughout British society. The Royal Airways incident had become a catalyst for broader discussions about veteran support and recognition, leading to policy changes across multiple industries. Margaret Hartwell, CEO of Royal Airways, had personally implemented new training programs for all customer service staff, focusing specifically on recognizing and respecting military service members. The company also established the Thompson Foundation. It's a charitable initiative providing free travel for veterans attending important family events. Mr. Richards, the supervisor who had treated William so poorly, had been terminated immediately. After the incident, in interviews following his dismissal, he expressed genuine remorse for his actions and became an advocate for veteran awareness programs, speaking at training sessions about the importance of recognizing service and sacrifice. William, meanwhile, had struggled to adjust to his newfound celebrity status. Letters of support arrived daily at his modest home in Surrey from fellow veterans, school children, and ordinary citizens who had been moved by his story. The local post office had to assign additional staff to handle the volume of mail addressed to him. "I never expected any of this," William confided to his son Michael during one of their regular Sunday dinners. "I just wanted to get to David's wedding quietly. Now I can't go to the grocery store without someone wanting to shake my hand and thank me for my service." Michael smiled at his father's bemused expression. "Dad, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's time people understood what you and your generation sacrificed for this country." The approach of the trooping, the color ceremony brought additional excitement and anxiety for William. As the newly appointed honorary colonel of the Royal Guards Regiment, he would have a prominent role in the ceremony, riding in the carriage procession, and taking part in the formal inspection of troops. The night before the ceremony, William carefully prepared his dress uniform one final time. Each medal was positioned perfectly, each ribbon aligned with military precision. But now, alongside his Victoria Cross and other decorations, he wore the insignia of his honorary colonelcy, a symbol of recognition that still amazed him. Sarah Mitchell, the flight attendant who had first championed William's cause, had been invited to attend the ceremony as a guest of honor. She sat in the special viewing area reserved for dignitaries, watching with tears of joy as the man she had helped received the recognition he deserved. As William took his place in the ceremonial carriage, waving to the thousands of spectators lining the mall, he caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, there standing with her children and pointing excitedly at his carriage. It was Jessica, the young check-in clerk, who had processed his ticket that difficult morning at Heathrow. After the incident, Jessica had become an outspoken advocate for better training and awareness within the airline industry. She had personally written to William, apologizing for not standing up to her supervisor and expressing her admiration for his dignity in the face of mistreatment. The ceremony itself was magnificent. William sat alongside other distinguished military leaders as King Charles inspected the troops, his presence a visible reminder of the connection between past and present, between the young soldiers on parade and the veteran who had walked the same path decades earlier. During the formal reception following the ceremony, King Charles sought out William once again. "Honorary Colonel," he said warmly, "how are you adjusting to all this attention?" William smiled, more comfortable now in the royal presence. "Your Majesty, it's been overwhelming but deeply meaningful. Support from the public has been extraordinary. But more importantly, I hope the conversation about veteran support continues long after people forget about my airport troubles." "I think you can be assured of that," the king replied. Your story has reminded everyone that respect and recognition shouldn't depend on circumstances. Every veteran deserves to be treated with dignity, whether they're in uniform or civilian clothes, whether they're traveling first class or economy. As the reception continued, William was approached by young military officers, current serving members who had heard his story and wanted to express their appreciation. Their enthusiasm and dedication reminded him of his own early days in service, full of pride and purpose. Later that evening, back at his hotel, William called his grandson David, who was on his honeymoon in Italy but had watched the ceremony coverage online. "Grandfather, we watched the entire ceremony," David exclaimed over the phone. "You looked absolutely magnificent in that carriage. I can't believe how much has changed since our wedding day." "Important thing hasn't changed, David," William replied gently. "Family is still what matters most. All this recognition is wonderful, but seeing you happily married is still the highlight of my year." As William prepared for bed that night, he reflected on the remarkable journey that had begun. With such humiliation at an airport check-in counter, the experience had taught him that dignity and respect could be lost and found, that ordinary citizens could become extraordinary advocates, and that sometimes the most meaningful recognition came from unexpected sources. The following morning, as William prepared to return home to Surrey, he received one final surprise. A delegation of current Royal Guard soldiers had requested permission to escort him to the train station. A gesture of respect from the active regiment to their new honorary colonel as he walked through King's Cross Station. Surrounded by the honor guard, William thought about all the young soldiers he had trained and mentored over the years. Many of them had gone on to distinguished careers of their own, carrying forward the traditions and values he had tried to instill. The train journey home was peaceful, giving William time to process everything that had happened. He had become, quite unexpectedly, a symbol of veteran dignity and recognition. But more than that, he had demonstrated that true honor couldn't be diminished by the ignorance or disrespect of others. When he finally arrived at his small home in Surrey, William found his garden gate decorated with ribbons in the colors of the Royal Guards Regiment, placed there by appreciative neighbors. Inside, his modest living room had been transformed into a gallery of cards, letters, and photographs from well-wishers around the world. Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor who had been collecting his mail, greeted him with tears in her eyes. "William, I've lived next door to you for 15 years, and I never knew what an extraordinary man you were. The whole neighborhood is so proud." As the weeks turned into months, William settled into his new role as honorary colonel with characteristic humility. He visited military bases, spoke at veteran events, and became a respected voice in discussions about military support and recognition. But he always insisted that his story was just one example of the countless acts of service and sacrifice made by military personnel throughout history. The airport incident that had started it all became a turning point not just for William, but for how British society approached veteran recognition. New protocols were established across industries, ensuring that service members would be treated with appropriate respect and dignity. On the first anniversary of David's wedding, the family gathered once again in Edinburgh, this time for a quiet celebration at the same hotel where William had first learned about the media coverage of his story. As they sat together, sharing memories and looking through photographs from that extraordinary day, William raised his glass for a toast. "A year ago, I thought I was just an old soldier trying to get to his grandson's wedding," he said with a smile. "I learned that sometimes our most difficult moments can lead to our greatest blessings. But most importantly, I learned that the respect and love of family is worth more than any recognition the world can offer." The family clinked glasses as William concluded his toast. "Here's to David and Sarah, to family, and to the understanding that true honor comes not from how others treat us but from how we carry ourselves in both triumph and adversity." Outside the hotel windows, Edinburgh Castle stood proudly against the evening sky, a symbol of endurance and dignity that seemed perfectly fitting for a man who had demonstrated both qualities in the most unexpected circumstances. William Thompson, honorary colonel and Victoria Cross recipient, had become a living reminder that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized, until extraordinary circumstances reveal their true character. The story that began with disrespect at an airport check-in counter had transformed into a celebration of service, dignity, and the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. And in the end, it proved that sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin with the most difficult departures.